Hi, I'm Elisa Lovo-Dimena, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about the integumentary system. Not the whole thing, but the basic concepts. Things like the hypodermis, the dermis, the epidermis, and a little bit about the importance of the skin in medicine. So the first thing I want to talk about is the integumentary system is made of a few different parts. So those main different parts are all kind of originally formed from the same core structure. We think of it as the original main cuticle, the skin. So the skin can take on many different forms, right? So we'll look at some thick skin, some thinner skin. We'll look at how it can change in response to radiation or heat, temperature, all kinds of good stuff. But also we'll take a look at some of the structures that change a little bit less frequently, but are also protective. Things like the hair and the nails. So the other thing to know about the skin, it is the most vulnerable organ. It's also the largest organ, and that's because it's all on the outside of the body. It's exposed to things like radiation from the sun, trauma, scrapes, scratches, or even worse, infection, which it can have multiple infections all at the same time, including needing to preserve its own healthy microbiome. And it's also very susceptible to chemicals. Some uptakes more rapidly than others. The study of the skin, the hair, the nails, and all the parts of the integumentary system is referred to as dermatology. So if you're somebody who's a medical practitioner who treats or studies the integumentary system, you are a dermatologist. Oh, I love this image. You're going to see it pretty much everywhere. So what this is the what I like to call birthday cake slice of the skin, which is kind of gross when you think about it, but really doesn't it kind of look like that office party cake? I mean, when you think about it, it's got kind of similar parts. Like for example, down here at the base, you have something that supports that cake, and when you get a piece of cake, I guess you get a plate, right? That's supportive. However, this part of the cake slice model is actually known as the hypodermis. Hypo is like just under, a little bit, or below. And when we talk about dermis, well, we're talking about this giant piece right here. Now that would be the carrot cake or the chocolate cake itself. And inside of it are all types of accessory structures. And we'll look at those in a little bit. And the last part I want you to look at is this epidermis. It itself has multiple layers, which we'll look at in another video. But for now, I just want you to know that it exists, and we'll talk a little bit about how it interacts with the dermis. So we're going to primarily focus on the dermis as it stands. So let's start going through some of these structures, right? Well, let's erase some of this up. Clean it up for you. Teeny tiny words. You need to be able to see those. Okay. So let's get into it. Let's start with the hypodermis itself. All of this support down here, you might have noticed, is a subcutaneous layer of adipose tissue. And adipose is basically fat cells, right? And it's highly vascularized, as you can see. Lots of veins and arteries, teeny tiny venules and arterioles, actually, to be more specific, that are going to feed and take away all types of, are going to take away waste products and especially deliver loads and loads of water. Water. Okay, the skin is a very big organ and it performs a lot of work. So we need a lot of this water, we need a lot of fat. We also need this as insulation, right? Some of it's temperature wise, but others just simply from pressure. Okay, so let's go ahead and get into the dermis proper. Okay, the dermis, how should we start? Hey, let's look at that hair, right? That's a big one sticking out right there. This is a hair. You might have noticed you have a few of these. And you might have noticed humans are a little bit different from a lot of different types of animals in that we have kind of less body hair than others, it seems. Except on the top of our heads, our pubic regions, and under our armpits, we just seem to be a little on the bald side. But what's kind of interesting to note is that we actually have the same amount of hairs on our body as, say, like our closest relative, the chimpanzee. And the thing that changed, though, is our hairs are thinner, right? So they're actually in a prepubescent stage. The rest of our body hairs do mature and develop. However, the large majority of what we have on our surface area kind of stays small, and that's because our skin is highly reactive to the environment. We need lots of vitamin D, right, which the skin participates in the manufacture of. We also need our skin to relieve lots and lots of heat because it turns out we were born to do things like run and have a lot of sustained cardio, which we'll get into in the future. But for now, just know that this organ has a lot of different functions, especially when we're looking at humans. So it's a very human-specific type of skin we're checking out. Okay, so, I mean, for heaven's sakes, have you ever seen a cat without hair or a dog? Not quite a human. We have like very thick skin, right? Lots of moisture, right? Lots of activity in this dermal region. So anyway, let's go back to this hair. Here it is. Okay, here's that hair. So this is the hair shaft proper. The hair shaft proper is cuticle. It's essentially dead keratinocytes and other types of cells. If they're rigid and they're hard, they help us do things like feel the environment. If you notice down here, we have sensory nerve fibers, which sit there and kind of branch into the hair itself. So that's why when you ever kind of feel like, oh, like it's a teeny tiny bug just crawling on you, it feels like it might as well be an elephant, right? In some parts of your body. Oh my gosh, what is this huge thing? And then, like, for example, your fingertips, they're really sensitive, so they can really feel a lot more. That's actually due to this guy down here, which is a mechanoreceptor. This is a Pacinian corpuscle, right? So we'll get back to Pacinian corpuscles in a minute. But all of this sensory information that comes from the surface of the skin, right? A lot of it has to do with touch and motions and vibrations. But anyway, so that's the sensory information that the hair tells us a little bit about our environment. Another thing that the hairs do that's kind of interesting is it's kind of related to these structures here, these glands right here and right here. So we have one is an apocrine type sweat gland, and this other one is, where'd it go? Oh, sebaceous, there it is, a sebaceous gland. It secretes sebum, and the sebum like kind of pours out, and like it does moisturize the hair, keep it nice and silky and shiny, but it also protects the surface of the skin, right? Apocrine is a type of sweat gland that also includes like fat in its secretions, or lots of oils as well. And so those can have different types of functions, like secreting pheromones, for example, or antimicrobials, or balancing chemicals that can establish a healthy microbiome on the surface of the skin, or even encourage other ones to have smells, right? So humans, we don't realize it, but we're actually pretty stinky. If you're in the wild, you can smell a human. Most animals can a mile away, right? And so those are two of the glands, and those hairs, and possibly even the motion from those hairs, encourage the secretion. So speaking of motion in the hair, let's look at this little individual here, right? This is kind of an interesting one. So this is an erector pili, actually pili, referring to the pili as like the hair. And so this teeny tiny muscle, there is some controversy. Some folks publish and they say, no, humans don't really have this. And other folks publish and say, yes, humans do have these. So it's kind of interesting. But I wanted to show you that this is a teeny tiny muscle, and it is attached to the hair follicle or the hair chamber itself. And we do know that if we have them, they're contracting and relaxing. And so there is motion. And some of that, if it's properly coordinated, coming all the way down here, would be to a motor nerve fiber, right? So these are going to cause them to contract, right? Because there's one thing that muscle can say to nerve, and that's contract, right? Acetylcholine. Okay, so there might be a little bit of motion. The jury might still be out on that. I'm not a hair research scientist. I did other types, but I just thought I'd throw that in there. Okay, so now you know about erector pili and possibly its function. You would know about the hair, you know about secretions, and you know about how those secretions are really important to keep things like your hair and your skin really, really healthy and shiny, right? Remember, we can really dry out our skin pretty bad, and so skin moisturization is pretty important in order to keep skin from cracking and to keep a healthy microbial balance. All right, let's take a look at some other structures. Looked at this, we looked at this, we looked at this, we looked at that. Oh, the hair bulb. This is like the intersection of the capillary, so the blood supply. All of these cells down here, which we'll look at more closely up in a future video, are going to be what feed the hair cells so they can nourish and make more and more so we can replace these hairs. And so an interesting thing about hair also is that it actually grows to a certain length. It just grows for a certain amount of time and then it releases at the bulb and a new one is formed. And that's why some of our hair never gets really like your arm hair, for example, doesn't get as long as the hair on your head, right? That one just keeps growing, but that's how some of the hair length is regulated, right? Those of us with dogs and cats really understand that. As soon as they reach a certain length, boom, shedding. All right. So, we looked at hypodermis. Oh, eccrine. Let's take a look at these sweat glands since we're talking about glands. So this is an eccrine sweat gland, for example. This one's going to be secreting things like sudoriferous secretion. So this is more watery, very heavily watery based, actually. And so a lot of the water is going to also have electrolytes like salt. And so what's kind of interesting, these little charged particles are involved in thermoregulation, right? And also some secretion of just different types of waste products. So what'll happen is you'll secrete, like say sweat. You might notice you can just sweat, you're sweating when you need to release heat. And so that heat energy will evaporate with the water. And when it takes that heat with it, what ends up happening is you don't have that heat on your body anymore. So that's kind of how that works. And humans, we sweat a lot. We have to drink so much water a day compared to like cats and dogs and lizards and birds and butterflies and all that. And part of the reason is because we're sweating so much. We're supposed to be able to operate in very high heats. It's a really interesting part of the human because if it wasn't for our skin, we wouldn't be able to operate in super hot temperatures. As long as we have enough water, we can relatively hang out at about 100 degrees where many animals might not survive very long. So we'll get into more about why that happens later. All right. Corpuscle group, right? So these are receptors. And as you notice, we talked a lot about the different types of nerves we're going to have. Let's talk about them a little bit more. So this lamellar, right? So this is a Pacinian corpuscle in it. Lamellar because it has all of these like kind of rings of a tree, right? All these layers, lamella, right? And so what it does is when someone pushes down on the skin, it senses that pressure. And so that's a pressure receptor, which is a little bit different from these delicate, but somewhat similar tactile corpuscles. So this is a touch sensitivity receptor. Okay. Also remember we have, here we have other neurons that are sensory. Other things that we might think of would be thermoreceptors, right? Or even chemo, sensing chemicals, chemoreceptors, right? So there's a whole bunch of different types of receptors on the skin, some more frequent than others, and they're all kind of doing different things. So there's not just one type of sensory information coming in. It's actually sensing all kinds of different things about the environment and the condition within the dermis, epidermis, and hypodermis itself. All right, let me see here. We talked about hairs. Let's see, hair follicle, glands. We talked about the blood supply. We talked about the, oh yeah, okay. So anywhere we have these little openings, technically that's a pore if a hair is not coming out of that. The other thing that's kind of, let's go over these guys right here. Let's do this intersection between the epidermis, right? It's just epi meaning outside, just above, or beyond, in this case, of course, the dermis. So it's this epidermal ridge because as you can see, it's kind of a ridge. Well, the other thing on the other side they refer to, right, is the dermal, meaning it's from the dermis, papilla. And so papilla or papillary means fingers. And we see papilla used quite a bit in anatomy altogether. And so just when you see that word, that's what you know. And so that allows for that intersection. It also is the point where we have the final terminal capillary loops, right? So they're just feeding right here, this like the deepest layer of the epidermis, which we'll talk about soon enough. And there's going to be a bunch of layers we'll look at. And so that's the last active layer of cells that are undergoing mitosis, right? Constantly reproducing. So, and they're creating this last surface layer, this cuticular. So that's it. Or at least for this part. So for this part, we looked at the idea of the integumentary system. And just basically some of its key components, the skin, the hair, the nails. And then we took a minute and we took the cake slice model of the dermis, epidermis, and hypodermis, and we went over some of the accessory organs and structures, some of their functions and some interesting things about them. So there's a lot more out there to learn. But for now, I just wanted to get the basics down. Okay, well, I hope you have a wonderful day and I'll see you again soon.